Well, greetings to everyone. This is our 32nd day in isolation here in Spain. Our isolation perhaps is a little more extreme than other places. So yes, I know it's been quite challenging for a lot of people as we have been listening, hearing about it. This is our weekly Bible study, and we have been studying through the Ten Commandments. But this week, before we kind of pick up where we left off somewhat a couple of weeks ago, I want to isolate this Bible study as a bridge, a bit of where we were before Palm Sunday. The last Sunday that we shared prior to Palm Sunday, we were still speaking on Judges. And what will be next week, when we probably will just continue our series on Judges and trying to apply it to today. I want to speak about the indispensable quality in leadership. The indispensable quality in leadership. I want to read to you out of the book of Luke, chapter 16. I want to read a parable. It's a very interesting parable, easy to understand at first, except for the last few words, especially where the master speaks. But hopefully we'll be able to concentrate yet on other verses and still stay within the context of the teaching. Let me just read to you Luke 16, verse 1 through 9, or maybe 8. Well, we'll see. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you will no longer be manager." And the manager said to him, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their house." So, summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he answered, 1,000 measures of oil. He said to him, "Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, "How much do you owe?" And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwelling." Now, the verses we want to concentrate on, I just wanted to put that in context for you, are verse 10, 11, and 12. And this is what it says. "One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you the true riches?" Verse 12. "And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" If you remember a little bit, we spoke about leadership, like I said, a few Sundays back. And, well, the truth is everything rises and falls on the basis of leadership, whether it's secular leadership or sacred. In the book of Judges, we saw that God had left a remnant of Canaanites in the promised land. for the Israelites to deal with. And we concluded that this was a test for his people, whether they would follow him or not, and to prepare them for the battles for the future. This is why we concluded God leaves some problems in our lives, and in your life, in my life, to test us, to perfect us, and to prepare us for the future service that we'll have in life. God chooses his leaders, we said, from the furnace of life, the trials of our life. God does not choose people for leadership out of idleness and laziness. He chooses them from the fires and trials of life. And this is what we've spoken of some weeks ago. And we want to now expand a little bit on that idea of leadership, you know. We know God raises leaders who are already seeking to serve him, and also at least motivated ones, and also that he does so for the purpose of growing them, and he does it by bringing them out of very difficult situations. That's where he forges them, as we said. So let's expand a little on this. When God allows us to be in the midst of fire, of the trials of life, what is it that he's looking for in us? What is he looking for in us? What is the supreme quality of God's leaders? If we look at what it is that makes them all unique, what is it that he is looking for? When the world seeks leaders, it does not seek them in the same place that God seeks for them, and nor does the world seek them with the same qualities that God seeks. For example, the world puts its focus on education, intelligence, brilliantness, creativity, cunningness, beauty, elegance, strength, independence, broad-mindedness, broad knowledge, experience, personality, etc., etc. When God looks for leadership, he doesn't look for these qualities. He only looks really for one quality. One quality. And we'll just blur it out right here, right now. That quality is faithfulness. Faithfulness. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verses 1 and 2, we read this. This is how one should regard us as servants of Christ and stewards of the ministries of God. Paul says people should regard us as servants, as stewards. And then he says, moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. In 2 Timothy 2:2, again, Paul writes to Timothy, a young pastor, and he says, what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, he says, entrust to faithful men. Why? Who will be then themselves able to teach other faithful men, others also, other faithful men. And interestingly enough, in Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, as God speaks to one of the churches, he says, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. So the difficulty in reality is finding faithful people. That is what's the difficulty, finding faithful people. Proverbs describes what the curriculum of most people would be. Proverbs 20 verse 6 says this, many a man proclaims his own steadfast love. Meaning, we think we're so great. We proclaim our own way of being, our steadfast love. We speak good of ourselves. The second part of that verse says, but a faithful man, who can find? Who can find a faithful man? Where are they? what is God looking for when he's looking for fidelity as a potential for leadership? Well, since we know that the quality is fidelity, is faithfulness, so would we just say to God something like, hey God, here I am, God, I'm faithful, pick me. Would that be enough? Would that be enough? Well, I say to you that there are at least 3 tests to determine fidelity, to determine faithfulness. We're going to draw from this passage that we just read. 3 ways in which God measures our faithfulness. We're going to find those aspects in verses 10 through 12. Now remember, there's this manager and he's serving his master, and his master finds out he's been, we call it, cooking the books. And so the master is going to get rid of him. He finds out. And so what he does, he's very shrewd. He goes to all the people that owe to the master, and he cuts their debt so that they would owe him. In other words, be in debt to him. Not to give him anything. It's just that he reduces their debt to the master, and by doing so, they are now indebted to him. How political. So in Luke chapter 16, verse 10 through 12, we find sort of the application of this test to determine faithfulness, these 3 tests. Now, know that the passage, the parable, is about kingdom investment. And I'm not going to do the parable. I'm not going to explain it all, nor the difficult parts. Maybe that'll be for another. Or you can ask me, send me an email. We'll try to work on it together. But the first one is, the first question I would say that determines this is, what do you do with the little? The little. Verse 10 says the following: one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. So what do you do with the little? You know, sometimes the little is put aside, meaning we don't value it. And so what do we do when it's just a little? When we only have a little bit of responsibility, or when we only have a little bit of time, or now when we only seem to have a very little bit of contact with the world outside of us. The majority of us, especially here in Spain, we just have hardly any contact. You know, we take out, if you have a dog, you take your walk out for a dog and you hope you run into a neighbor you can talk to. Or in my case, I've gone to the pharmacy a couple of 3 times, and what do? Well, I take the longest way around possible to go to the pharmacy, and everybody I see on the way, you know, you say hello, how you doing, how's your day, from a distance, you know, social distancing. So what do you do with the little? He who is faithful in little, he says, will be faithful in much, because that's the character of the person. Not because it comes natural, because that's your character. If you're faithful in little, well then by all means you will be faithful in much. But the unfaithful one is unfaithful in the little that he gets, and he will be, of course, unfaithful in the much that he gets. I'm sure that the master, had he known that his manager, his bookkeeper, was going to be an unfaithful fellow, he wouldn't have given him all that work. Obviously, he didn't test him in the extent necessary, didn't prove him. And so, he shows to be a man who was unfaithful, and the unfaithful one gets fired, okay? So what do you do? The next thing is, well, what do you do with money? With money. And you say, oh no, you're not going to talk to us about money. Well, if you know me at all, you know that we just don't talk about money. We're just going through this passage here. We're going through these verses. And how we manage wealth, okay, the possessions, the things that we have, the purchasing power that we have is important to God. It says in this next verse, in verse 11, if then you have not been faithful in the righteous wealth, who will entrust you with true riches. If you've not been faithful in the righteous wealth. So God is speaking using that, and we're gonna see where this goes. The idea is, if you have not been faithful with money, with wealth, then who's going to trust you with what is more valuable than money? You say, well, what can be more valuable than money? Well, there's a lot of things that are more valuable than money. Right now, I bet you're just the freedom to be able to go out. What's the use of having money right now when we can't spend it, we can't do anything with it? So the true wealth, therefore, is a connection, which deserves our attention between money and spiritual life. There's this connection. Wealth and spiritual life have a connection. Or at least the management of wealth, whether it's a lot or a little. Our management of that wealth, again, much wealth or little wealth, there is a connection, there's a spiritual connection with life there. In the four Gospels, and this was shocking for me, I'm sure it will be for you. In the four Gospels, Jesus taught 38 parables. Of the 38 parables, 16 deal with money. There is more said in the New Testament about money and possessions than about heaven or hell. There are more verses on money and wealth than on prayer. There are 500 verses of faith and prayer, but there are more than 2,000 verses that speak of riches. So there seems to be a connection between our use of wealth or money and our hearts. Our hearts. So according to this parable, it seems that God does not entrust the riches of wisdom, of understanding, of eternity to someone who is a poor steward of money. That's verse 12. Again, we're not exegeting the whole passage. You're just going to have to trust me. So if we do not know how to use and manage money as people and as church, right, then it seems that God will not trust us with the wealth and the blessings and the eternal things that pertain to life. On the contrary, it seems that we would suffer a kind of spiritual anemia because of it. So we've been locked up now for 32 days, right? Now it's easy for me to say things like, well, I've been busy. Well, of course I've been busy. I've been busy because I've had to reinvent how to do church, how to connect with you, the congregation of International Christian Assembly. I have been caring, wanting to know what's going on in your lives. But what about you when you're alone? You have no neighbors. Your responsibilities perhaps you are very, very, very minimal. You say, well, so what do I do? Well, my thought is this. Are you being faithful with what little you have? With what little contact you have? With what little knowledge you have of the social media and all the things that you can have on your phone or on a computer? Are you being faithful with communicating to others hope? Are you being faithful in communicating to others that there is an answer to all of this? Or are you just sort of kicking back and watching telly all day? Number 3, what do you do? Another test would be, what do you do with what belongs to others? And really, that's what this parable is about, right? What are you doing with that which is not yours, what belongs to others? How faithful are you with what belongs to others? That the faithfulness in the little things. Have you ever had people borrow things from you, and you didn't know them very well, but you took a chance. You lend them this, you lend them that, and perhaps your car. You let somebody take your car for a ride, right? They needed it, and they come back. They only took it out for half a day or just a ride to the next town over, and they come back and your car the tank has been topped up and washed. And you go, well, you didn't have to do that. But they say, no, yes, we did. Thank you for lending us your car. It was very generous of you. They went the extra mile. They didn't just say thank you. They showed, right? How you treat what belongs to another person shows the character, right? And you feel bad that they did all of that they washed it and that they topped it up just because they borrowed it for a few hours or a day or overnight or whatever. But how do you feel when they bring back the car and they didn't, not only they didn't top it up, but they didn't put any petrol, gas. They didn't put any fuel into the vehicle. How do you feel about that? You immediately see the people in a different light, right? You think, well, how irresponsible of them. So what do you do when you borrow clothes? What do you do with books that you borrow? In our home, our children grew up reading books. There were books all over the place, not TV, just books. But we taught them how to treat their books. We said books were valuable. And we said that they had to treat the books very, 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 very well. Why? We were teaching. It wasn't just teaching them to teach. We were teaching character, right? What do you do when you borrow tools? My word, if I would get back all the tools I've ever lent in my lifetime, I'd have 3 of everything or more. So what about if you're still working or you work or you're going to go back to work? What about the hours that belong to your boss? Those breaks that you take, the lunch hour that you take. Are you faithful with what belongs to someone else? How do you deal with what do you do with, how do you deal with, and what do you do with what is someone else's? Will determine how little or how much God will give us to administrate. Because we are administrators. We are administrators. Are we faithful administrators? See, in that parable in Luke 16, you're not the manager at this point. You might not even be the administrator. But what the parable says is at the end of the day, we all administrate something. And there's only 2 kinds of administrators, good or bad. Are we faithful? Because the good is faithful, a faithful administrator. Anyway, why? Why this idea? Well, all your life, you're a steward. You're an administrator. Because everything we have belongs to another. That's a principle every Christian needs to learn. If you haven't learned that, you need to. Your life will be a lot better. I remember when my first child was born. In the hospital, I think it was, it was in the hospital, we hadn't left. Mary was only there, I think 2 days, maximum 3. But while she was in the hospital, they brought the baby over to us, to our room, or I don't remember if she slept in the room. No, they brought the baby, right? And I remember Mary and I, we prayed. And we said to God, this is not our baby. This is your baby. We are our stewards of this daughter that you've given to us. And we asked him to help us administrate, manage faithfully her life. And we did that with each one of our daughters because we really believed that they were just given to us for a season. We had to do the best we could at administrating them. So everything we have. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 7 says, what do you have that you did not receive? What do you have that you did not receive? Do you remember what it said for us in 1 Corinthians 4, but verses 1 and 2? Because I said that to you. This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ, stewards of the ministry of God. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful. So, everything that we have has been given to us. Everything belongs to God. So I want to finish with this thought before we break up here. 3 things we all want. Sure, there's something we all want. And we find it in verse 10, the first one. We all want more. We wanted more. Everybody wants more. Just make sure that the more that you really want is eternal. That has to do with eternity. And that shows your character. Number 2, we all want true riches. If you're a believer, you want true riches. You've probably come to that point in your life where you've realized, the bank, that's just so that we can pay the bills and be able to keep a roof over our head and eat healthy. True riches is what we store in heaven. Only the eternal has value. What we all want are true riches. And number 3, we want what is ours. Sure, we all want what is ours. That's verse 12. Verse 12. At the end of the day, we say, I just want what is out, what is mine. But put that in the right context, because yet all we have has come from another. Believers know that. There is no mine because I deserve it. There is no mine because I work for it. There is no mine because I've earned it. There is a mine because it was given to me to administrate. We have very little of a lot of things and a lot of other things right now. We have a lot of time perhaps on our hand. We have very little contact. We have very little to do manually, or maybe, whatever. I don't know what your circumstance is. But whatever little contact you have with the world, remember, they're scared. They are afraid. They have no idea what's going on. Hey, listen, we don't know what's going on. We hear all the things that are being said in the news, this and that, and it was him, and it was her, and it was this, and it was that, and it's for this reason and that reason. Folks, we're not going to fix it. That's above our pay grade. Why don't we focus on helping others get through these days and get to the other side, so that we can then be even more active when we're given more. We'll have shown faithfulness during a difficult time. God will give us more service once this season of life has changed. Well, may God bless you. I trust that just engaging again on this level will prepare us a little more for what is to come the Sundays following, as we dive back into the book of Judges. God bless you. Have yourself a wonderful, wonderful time, week, day, wherever you are. And we hope to be able to see each other and interact soon. God bless you.